Hello, and welcome to At the Symposium. I know it's been a while, and I don't know if I've explained this in the previous video, but the reason why we haven't had any videos is because my setup has been disrupted because I got some other things going on. So, and I like the way, those videos are produced, so I like to keep it that way. Otherwise, I'm kind of at a loss having to record in a different setup or a different room. But it's been some time, and I thought I'd come on here and address a question that's kind of been on my mind a little bit because I was having a discussion with somebody who was also in the humanities, and we're kind of, discussing the legitimacy or the effect or importance of having background, understanding, or education in philosophy or anything in the humanities for that matter. And for that, I thought it would be important to kind of address the question of, well, why study philosophy, or really, again, anything in the humanities? And I think the primary question, the shortest answer I can get to that, without doing some kind of academic treatise here, without, coming up with some really elaborate intellectual answer, I think the first answer that comes to my mind concerning that question is really simple, and it really just has to do with becoming a better citizen. I think those in the discipline of philosophy or in the humanities are really just concerned with being better citizens, more well-rounded citizens. And I don't mean that just in the in your particular nation state, but I mean in a sense a citizen of the world, essentially. Because the humanities tends to be about what people did before you, right? So it's the humanities is also tied to a deep analytical study of history. So why not know about that? And knowing about that would make you a better citizen. So I think, and the reason I mention this is because there is a lot of talk about, schools, what should people be learning going to college. That's always up for debate. And I'm not talking here about getting a degree per se in the humanities. I'm just talking about being educated or learning about things in the humanities. That's kind of where this discussion came from. It's like, okay, well, is there legitimacy in doing that? Should it be a part of the curriculum? Should it be something that someone focuses on studying? And I would say, even outside of the academy, and I would say, yeah, if they're interested in becoming better citizens. I think that I could very well speak for the philosophical community, and in that sense, that there's probably a pretty good consensus there on the effect of studies in philosophy. It's like we want to gather that we're becoming better citizens by this, and then what does it really mean to be a better citizen? Now, I think that is probably where it's been lost, you see, because the legitimacy of studying in the humanities has been lost, but I think that's actually directly tied to the loss in our desire to become better citizens, essentially. So, and we know this, I think, in America pretty well because of globalization. We've basically been bought out. We're trying to regain a little bit of that, but we're trying to do that in an economic sense. We have yet to address it in a cultural sense. We've been bought out culturally as well. That's because our culture here in America tends to follow the market, and the consumerist market tailored itself towards a globalized economy that disenfranchised us economically, and it also disenfranchised us culturally. So I think we're at the point where we don't really care that much about being better citizens. Now, there's that front, but I think what also contributes to this is the rise of relativism. With the rise of relativism, made us a much more individualistic society, where it's I have my truth, you have your truth, and I'm just going to go live out my truth, and you're going to live out your truth, and then so we don't have the same social fabric that we did years ago. We don't have the same social fabric that most societies in history had or tried to achieve anymore. We don't have this sense of social fabric anymore. Now, at best, the fabric that we have is tailored towards our political affiliation or some political cause that we see as worthwhile. But we don't have a unified social fabric, because even before these times, before the relativism, before the globalization, even if you had some kind of special interest politically or in terms of some kind of social issue or what have you, you would still share the same social fabric with those on the other side of the aisle, or those that were unaffiliated, unconcerned, or unaware of your social concerns. Today, primarily our social fabric is really predicated on our primary affiliation, and we don't have an affiliation really beyond that, which I think is a shame, and I think that is actually where the humanities loses its affect and loses its importance, because we're not geared towards accomplishing that kind of thing anymore to become better citizens, especially in a unified way. And this is why this is important too. We can go into the humanities, study philosophy, do this or that, especially sociology, psychology, whatever it is. But if you don't have a culture in which it wants to reciprocate the evolution of mind, ideas, and human progress on the same terms, then you really can't implement the cause for becoming a better citizen. And again, I think it's pretty plain today in the ways in which we see this. We see this just in the disassociation from one another. We have less relationships. We have weaker relationships. So the strength of relationships is less. Of course, divorce, marriage, all that kind of thing are at lows. Again, just general camaraderie amongst people is much less than it had been in the past. And then, not to mention, obviously, all the political turmoils and the tensions amongst people. Again, we're not very unified. We don't have a lot of social fabric anymore, and without the interest in social fabric, it's hard for the humanities, it's hard for philosophy to express itself at its best. So there is because I think some people maybe that are outside of it, they don't understand, or might think, well, what's the point of that? Well, typically, if we look at it in an educational sense, much like I did, lots of people study philosophy as in pursuit of going to law school, because the rigor of philosophy will prepare you for the rigor of legal studies. But beyond that, many people would wonder, well, why study philosophy? Well, the most poignant reason is to become a better citizen. But we've lost that interest in, I think, becoming a better citizen because of that individualistic nature, and that's an important thing to acknowledge here. Because one might say, well, can't you just, like being a better citizen is like being a better person, you can just do that on your own. Yes and no. There's a degree to which that doesn't work, and that's kind of the situation that we're in now, and I think it's worth talking about, because it's worth acknowledging here, because we have such a good example of this here and now, is that You can't just be a better citizen by yourself. If you want to be a better citizen, you also have to be in a culture and around people who care and value about that kind of thing, so that you can share and expand on the betterment of your civilization. But if there's no unified sense of your civilization, and those within your civilization don't share the aspiration of becoming a better civilization and what that actually means, or what that should mean, you see, so to not even we don't even have those kind of conversations. So it's not even, hey, we want to become a better civilization, let's do this. We don't even really discuss how we plan to become a better civilization. Most of that, unfortunately, today has been by default, kind of de facto, decided by technological markets, and some people go with it, some people don't. Most people just seem to wait to see what happens. But again, that's the loss of social fabric. See, this is something that fascinates me. This is something that worries me as well. It's something that I don't think we've addressed a lot. Is that for most of human history, people were very vigilant. We got to this point because of vigilance by very many people. I mean, for the last, I don't know, you say 500-600 years, people were very vigilant. What I mean by vigilant, I mean, look at all the societies that people started, all the kind of the social contracts that we came up with, the constitutions, the countries, the formalities. You understand all these ways of life, these ways of constructing society, essentially. And when it didn't work, even we were vigilant about restructuring the system, but not in like the way we see it today, with just like rebellion towards the system, but real efforts towards changing. And I'm not even going to say changing, because that's kind of a word that's been co-opted, but really going and developing what we actually want the society to be like. You see, today we tend to admonish the system or attack the system, but most of us do not put effort into what we want to develop and how we want things to be in the future. We want the future to come from somebody else. We just want someone else to make it and give it to us, rather than constructing the future which we see as fit for our own civilization, which is pretty stark and pretty grim if you look at it. So the people that say they're concerned and should be concerned also don't put effort into actually constructing the future which they say they want to be a part of. So then again, the question goes, and how can you be upset when it doesn't come out your way, And I'd like to. This goes beyond the discussion here, and I don't want to make this a long video, but I would go as far as to say that has a lot to do with how and why we end up in situations like we have in America today. It's because of that kind of disenfranchisement, but not from the state disenfranchising people, but people disenfranchising themselves from their own capability into being the guardians and makers of their own future, and the civilization being the guardian and maker for their own future. Again, societies in the past really made themselves what they wanted to be. I mean, America itself made itself into what it wanted to be. We've lost a lot of that spirit. If there's anything that concerns me personally, as far as the health and wealth of our nation in the future, it has to do with things of that matter, which is, I do not see, unless we get into contact with exactly this principle, then I don't see how things will ever really, get better and we might be able to live, so let me articulate what better means. Better means, I'm talking better in a social sense of having a more unified social fabric again. Having cheaper commodities and a healthier economy is not what I'm considering better. Those things will happen just by virtue of interest in the market and the way cycles change and what have you. But the cultivation or the recultivation of a healthy social fabric is not something that's necessarily going to come, I don't believe, out of a derivative of something else. The healthier economy is not necessarily going to make a stronger social fabric. A certain political party winning, a new president, a certain president, a different kind of president, whatever the thing is, it's not necessarily going to strengthen our social fabric. The strengthening of the social fabric, for me, I believe, comes from a concerted interest into having one first, and then a concerted interest in wanting to develop a unified vision for what our social fabric should be, and going after that. Which is pretty plain and simple to a degree, and it's obviously to what has been done before in the past. But now I guess the last question then is to kind of address: is it worth then for somebody to do their own independent study in philosophy or the humanities if we don't have the same strength in our social fabric to express it? I'd still say yes. It's a harder trot, but I would still say yes, because I think self and personal development is always worth it. And it might be unfortunate that we might not be able to express what you have to give, or what we could contribute, to the extent to which you want to contribute, or to the extent in which you want what you have to contribute to play a role into the grander scheme of your civilization. It doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do it, and I don't think it'll last forever. This is the other thing, and maybe the more people that are participating, the more people could make a difference. I mean, to give you an example, Hillsdale College is one of the foremost institutions that is tackling exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not familiar with Hillsdale College, you should look them up. And they're quite set apart from most other universities in the country for the fact of their approach to taking the humanities and looking at it as precisely a foundation for building better citizens. And they publish a lot of content about this, and they have in their professors, they teach in that framework. They don't teach in the framework of let's just learn this to learn this, or let's just read this to read it, or let's just be intellectual for the sake of intellectualism. It's very much geared towards becoming better citizens in their purview, and they put a lot of effort into that, irrespective of whether you believe in their philosophies. They do, and I can't even say, I don't know if they necessarily are conservative. It's a classical school, so they're going to be more conservative than what we might find typically today. But I don't know that they're like ideological. I think it really has to do with what they feel needs to be addressed at this specific moment, and that's philosophy in a nutshell as well. Philosophy in a lot of ways there's a lot of things to philosophy. I mean, it's a historical analysis. It's understanding different writers and different schools of philosophy, and all the major works in the different schools of philosophy. But philosophy is also about addressing the current issues of your age. Okay. Addressing the current issues of your time period. And right now we live in what's called the postmodern time period. And there are different issues in the postmodern time period as there were in the modern time period or the pre-modern time period. So those of us in philosophy would spend time analyzing what's happening in the postmodern time period. That's very much what I feel is the case for Hillsdale College. They publish a lot of content, spend a lot of time, do a lot of speaking engagements, and invite speakers to their school having to do with addressing, the postmodern time. So I think that's also a very important point to kind of to acknowledge, is that oftentimes I think people think that like this is it. The world is how the world is. The world is just how it is at this specific moment. It's not always been this way. It's not always going to be that way. And I mean that for better, for worse. I don't mean that in in like a Pollyannish sense of, oh yeah, everything's going to get better, or an optimistic sense of everything's going to get better. I'm not. It's not a value judgment, or it's not a value judgment on the status of the culture. It's just to say that we're living in a specific time period, and things will change from there, however they do. And the people that will be involved in having it change will be the people that decide to. Studying philosophy, having a background in humanities, will probably aid in you help in making healthier decisions if you care to do so. This is at the Symposium. Thanks for watching.